Her lower back learned the truth before her heart did. The fingers kneading along her spine promised care, but the silence behind them vibrated with a secrecy she could feel in the tendons. Every pass down the muscles near her sacrum told the same unspoken story: hours that never returned home, receipts folded twice in pockets that avoided the laundry basket, and a scent of foreign citrus that did not belong to their house. She held still while the massage soothed the ache from a day that drained her bones. When the final press landed, a tremor of knowledge rose. The body recognized betrayal first. The mind followed, slow and resisting. She had built her life in small, precise rituals that made chaos behave. Every morning at 5:30, before the sky finished erasing the night, she placed the kettle on the flame and measured oats by feel. The apartment, the good one with the warm floorboards and the stubborn bedroom window, sat 2 bus lines from the hospital where she worked as a charge nurse. The job asked everything, so she arranged her world to give. She folded towels into undefeated stacks, programmed lights to mimic sunrise on days when her shift ended after dawn, and turned the hallway mirror so it caught the first sliver of light and made it look like hope. She loved her husband because he understood the arithmetic of exhaustion. He met her at the door with a glass of water, mischievous eyebrows lifted, and sometimes, when her shoulders locked into a fortress of ache, he would warm oil between his hands and melt her tension with a patience that felt like prayer. He ran a small studio that trained massage therapists, a business stitched together with word of mouth and grit. He said he admired how she stood up in rooms that tried to push her down. She believed him because she needed to. The city they lived in carried a complicated weather, sweltering summers that stuck to the skin and winters that bit the knuckles raw. On the sidewalks, faces turned into instruments for guessing and sorting, and hers, brown, bright, tired, resilient, read as a map too many people felt entitled to interpret. She learned how to counter the micro-calculations, the security guard who scanned her badge longer than necessary, the patient family that questioned her orders, the downstairs neighbor who accused her of making noise she didn't make. She kept a ledger of injustices and balanced it with small mercies, a colleague saving her a seat in morning huddle, a grandmother's hand squeezing hers after a long night, a stranger holding the elevator when her arms were full of charts and coffee. In this calculus of struggle and grace, her marriage had always been the constant. Home felt like agreement. The kitchen sink's slow drip, the plant that refused to die in the bathroom, the chipped mug with a sun drawn by a niece, these were anchors. So when her husband suggested they take on a tenant in the spare room for extra income, she said yes without caution. The applicant seemed ideal, a visiting physical therapist from another state, contracted for a 12-week rotation at a rehab clinic, older than both of them, polished but disarming, with an efficiency that did not need an audience. She arrived with 2 suitcases, paid her share on time, and volunteered to cook on Thursdays. Meals turned into rituals, Thursdays into a private holiday of flavors and laughter, and the house air gained an edge of bergamot and green tea. At the hospital, the winter wave hit. Beds filled like an incoming tide, and shift changes turned into baton passes made at a sprint. She held the floor together with a voice that could be both velvet and steel. Her husband countered the storm with warm hands and steady presence. He started offering her longer back rubs, lingering at the pressure points. She told herself this was how love adjusted to strain. The body knows what it needs and asks for it. She didn't know yet that bodies can also lie, especially when other bodies are involved. It began with a misalignment of time. He started teaching evening workshops 2 nights a week, then 3, then only when the roster fills. The tenant's schedule, somehow, overlapped with his. She began returning later, the elevator sighing open near midnight. The apartment developed new silences, honest and smooth, like ice over fast water. She moved through them carefully, telling herself that fatigue made patterns where none existed. Then came the small evidence, the kind that refuses to hold still. A folded note in a coat pocket with a name of a tea she didn't drink. A new bottle of massage oil tucked behind their usual brand. A second set of glass meal prep containers labeled in tidy script she couldn't match to anyone else's. When she asked about the tea, He shrugged and said a client recommended it. When she lifted the new oil, he said a supplier sent a sample. When she touched the containers, she laughed and called herself paranoid. He laughed too, and the sound felt slightly off-key. Work sharpened everything. A patient arrived who could not breathe, lungs filled with a stubborn storm. The family's questions sliced into her authority, and though she answered every one with clinical clarity, their faces told an older story about who gets to be believed. She charted meticulously, over-communicated, protected her team, and swallowed her anger because unspent fury is sometimes the only way to finish a shift. On the bus home, she felt the ache gathering, a fist between her shoulder blades. She texted, "Back is bad. If you have hands, bring them." He did. Warm oil. Slow circles. The faithful choreography she trusted. Yet beneath the heat of his palms she felt a trembling, not in her muscles, but in him, a stutter the hands cannot hide when they've told too many versions of the truth. He paused once, as if listening to a sound she could not hear. She asked if he was okay. He said he was just tired. The word landed like a thin coin. The tenant introduced new recipes as the city's cold dug in ginger soups, lemon chicken that tasted like sunlight, rice that steamed the windows. She insisted on plating everything beautifully, as if presentation could absolve intimacy. Her presence in the kitchen grew careless with boundaries. A robe in the laundry basket not belonging to either of them. A pair of slippers too new to be from the thrift store where she usually shopped. The houseplant started leaning toward the tenant's window, chasing a different angle of light. One Thursday, the hospital posted a shift photo on the internal board, a celebratory shot of exhausted faces after a brutal double. She stared at herself in the center, chin lifted, eyes red, shoulders squared in evidence of another day endured. Underneath, someone had captioned, "Our rock." The words scraped something tender. At home that night, while her husband's hands pressed into her lower back, she felt the bed's edge dip in a way that suggested memory. Her body flinched like prey. The storm broke on a Tuesday painted unremarkable, gray sky, salt on the stairs, neighbor's dog complaining about the cold. She returned early from a staff meeting canceled at the last minute, key turning quietly in the lock as she balanced a bag of groceries on her hip. The apartment had a hush that didn't match the time of day. Her steps felt amplified on the floorboards. In the bedroom, the bed was made the way only she made it, tight corners, smooth quilt, but the pillows told a different story, dented in unfamiliar shapes. On the dresser, a ceramic dish held 2 sets of earrings. She owned one. She found what she wasn't looking for in the bathroom mirror, not a reflection but an arrangement of air, humid and guilty. She heard the muffled slide of a door, the spare room, and her feet moved before her mind could vote. The door opened with a softness that accused her of knowing. Inside, the tenant's suitcase gaped like a mouth and from it rose the quiet smell of bergamot and oil. On the bed lay a towel from their bathroom and a small, pale rectangle, a receipt crumpled once then smoothed, time-stamped during last week's late workshop, listing 2 massages booked back-to-back at a studio under a membership that did not exist in their financial spreadsheets. Her heart did not race. It hardened. She walked to the living room and placed the grocery bag on the counter. She set out the lemons, one by one, yellow planets rolling slightly before they found their orbits. He came out of the spare room with an expression arranged for a scene he thought he could manage. The tenant followed, chin lifted with an elegance that did not apologize. The distance between them pulsed with an admission her mouth refused to form. She did not speak. She reached for the bottle of new oil, the sample, the innocent product, and tipped it. It poured like a confession, slow and irrevocable, into the sink. The citrus rose from the drain, seductive and antiseptic at once. He moved to stop her, hands lifted, but she stepped back, palms up, as if addressing a code blue. Her eyes asked the question that ends houses. His eyes looked away, then back, then away again. The tenant folded her arms, an answer in posture. In the silence, the city spoke through the window, the siren, the neighbor's radio, the elevator complaining. The room synchronized to one certainty, The body recognizes what the mind cannot stand to name. There, finally, he let his hands drop, and everything came undone. The decision to leave took shape like frost on a window, first a delicate lace, then a thick veil that hid what used to be visible. She booked a short-term sublet near the river, a tight studio with a generous window and a heater that hummed like a cat. She packed with discipline, folding shirts like the pages of a new book and assigning memories to boxes labeled with verbs: keep, donate, discard, survive. He tried the language of repair, texts that attempted honesty but bent around the center, offers to attend counseling, promises that mistakes can be turned into teachers. She understood that teachers sometimes burn the school down to make their lesson unforgettable. She chose the exit. At work, she told her manager she needed 3 days to relocate. The request traveled through the familiar bureaucracy and came back with a pinched yes and a reminder about staffing shortages. When she returned, the unit looked the same and felt different. She had always moved through it like a conductor, raising and lowering the invisible baton that kept the rhythm. Now she moved like someone who had learned a new tempo, one that separated cruelty from indifference and steadiness from love. She noticed where she was treated as indispensable without being treated as equal. She refused to carry extra without acknowledgement. She documented. She delegated. She did not apologize for the space she needed to be whole. The tenant left the apartment 2 weeks later, claiming a contract extension in another city. She carried her suitcases out with a grace that felt like theater and left behind a spice jar that smelled of lemon rind and defiance. The landlord texted about repainting the spare room. She said yes and added that the deposit return should be made to her account alone. The landlord hesitated, then complied, the most minor of restitutions. In the sublet, nights pressed against the glass. She learned to fall asleep with the hum of the heater and the rhythm of her own breath. She relearned breakfast, oats, fruit sliced precisely, honey drizzled like forgiveness she did not feel obligated to give. She walked along the river's steel-gray edge, the city's architecture stacked like arguments around her. She watched gulls describe wide circles as if practicing patience. She stopped making up reasons why people hurt each other. She stopped auditioning for her own life, asked to take the role she had always been playing. Spring arrived with a grudging generosity, a handful of warm days tossed into the cold as an advance on the season to come. She stood under a tree with tight fists of buds and thought of all the times she had been required to prove the same credentials twice, to repeat the same answer because someone couldn't accept that it came from her. She thought of the night shift photo with "Our Rock" printed beneath her face, and how that phrase meant reliability without credit. She wasn't a rock anymore. She was a river, moving, reshaping banks that assumed they would last forever. Her husband, ex now, the legal line drawing a clean edge around a bruise, sent one last letter that came without a return address. Inside, a typed page, apology proctored by a word processor, measured, rational, full of the vocabulary of a man who had practiced the art of explaining. She read it once, placed it under a lemon on the counter, and went to work. There, a patient whose breath struggled like a bird in a wire cage gripped her wrist. Not a word passed, eyes held. She adjusted the oxygen, charted the change, and felt the familiar stitch where purpose sutures pain. Racial injustice did not evaporate because personal betrayal had claimed the stage for a season. It still threaded her days, a family's doubt shaped like courtesy, a resident's question shaped like oversight, a security check shaped like concern. But the betrayal had taught her a language sharper than fury. She spoke with documented clarity. She invited witnesses into rooms that used to be arenas. She kept names, dates, times, outcomes. She insisted on feedback being recorded where it counted. When exhaustion threatened to turn her into silence, she walked to the river and remembered that water wears stone down without shouting. Months later, in a market by the docks, she saw a bottle of the massage oil, the same citrus top note, the same promise of ease. She lifted it and brought it to her nose. The scent rose like a memory she could observe without entering. She placed it back on the shelf with the reverence one offers a solved riddle. Her back did not ache that day. She had begun to sleep differently, more deeply, as if her body finally believed the house would not betray it. She moved out of the sublet when the lease ended and into an apartment that faced east. The morning light arrived without negotiation, filling the kitchen like a precise kindness. She bought new towels, softer than the hospital washers allowed, and a small plant that thrived without drama. On Thursdays, she cooked for herself, not to erase the past ritual, but to reclaim the calendar. She kept the lemons, though. Cut them into moons, placed them on fish, floated them in water. A bright note in a sober composition. When she thought of the moment in the living room, the bottle tilting, the confession poured down the drain, she recognized it as the threshold. Not the ending of a marriage, though it was that, but the ending of a story she had told herself about endurance as virtue and suspicion as failure of faith. She had endured more than anyone should be asked to, in rooms where her skin became an argument against her expertise, and at home where tenderness grew a second face. She decided that belief from now on would be earned, not deserved. She decided that her hands would touch her own back first, learning where the old knots held, practicing the pressure required to release them. The body recognized betrayal first. The mind followed, slow and resisting. The heart, finally, chose the direction of the river. Takeaway/engagement prompt. Betrayal often arrives in the language of care, gentle, skilled, and practiced. What signals has your body noticed long before your mind would listen, and what would change if you trusted that wisdom the first time it whispered?